We are live once again for a fantastic Cinevo Conversations coming first time ever on our Discord channel and on Clubhouse, and coming soon to our YouTube channel as well. Today we are going to have a great guest in Ralph Lucchese. Before we get going with that, though, I want to make sure that everyone is aware of the Cinevo Grant Contest. It's a really great program, really focused on our engagement with the independent filmmaker community and with the student filmmaker community. Obviously, at Cinevo, we've had a lot of A-list, ace-caliber clients, to name a few: NBC, Universal, BBC, Mattel, many, many others. But one thing we really pride ourselves on here is our engagement with the next generation of creators and our commitment to doing our part to helping those creators find a path. So with that in mind, this year in 2023, Cinevo is going to be doing a grant contest. We're going to be awarding $20,000 in rental grants over 5 projects. We're going to have an $8,000 grand prize that it's open to everyone, students and professionals. We have 2 $3,000 grants specifically for students that are currently enrolled. One for fiction, one for nonfiction. And then the same 2 $3,000 grants for professionals, non-students, one fiction, one nonfiction. Make sure to visit our website, cinevo.com. Check out our link regarding that contest. Email us at contest@cinevo.com if you have any questions about it. We would love to field a project from you, our listener, or from somebody in your filmmaking community. It's something that we're really proud of. There's no entry fee required or anything like that. We just want to see what you create. Now let's see. Do we have our guest yet? Is Ralph yet? Oh, well, he will be joining us very shortly. Scheduled to get going right around 3 o'clock today.
Hey, can you hear me, boss?
Ralph!
What's going on?
Good to see, I can see your picture, and it's great to hear your voice. Where are you joining us from? You're on the East Coast somewhere today, is that right?
Yes, I'm over in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Home operation of the Ralph Lucchese podcasting project, which we will definitely be touching base on here in a little bit. We've got so much to talk about today. I hope we can pack it all in. So, Ralph, you're joining us from a pretty unique perspective in your career, having had a pretty unique background. I mean, why don't you go ahead and fill us in, the early years pre-production and what got you into the path where you are now. Tell us a little bit about your background and your military experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, do you want to wait for it to actually kick off at 6 o'clock? I know we're going to do a quick sound check. I don't mind kicking it off early.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get rocking and rolling, man. Why not?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. So, wow, military experience, bringing it onto the film industry. You'd be shocked how similar the processes are, if we're being quite frank and honest with each other. So, kind of quick background on myself. Grew up on the East Coast, in the back hills of the Poconos. If you've been watching the news recently, you've actually realized that there was a parent killer named Brian Kohlberger that comes from this area. Very, very unfortunate. So that's the kind of publicity and notoriety we get here, apparently. So, but no, grew up I'm a Staten Island kid, New York kid, moved to Pennsylvania, finished my schooling there, failed out of 2 colleges before joining the military. And that was more of my own choosing, right? College just wasn't for me. Just wasn't wasn't the direction path. So I went to the military EOD, explosive ordnance disposal. Dismantled bombs for a little bit, and then had the opportunity to cross-train to aircraft fuel systems mechanic, a more safer, secure job. So I ended up taking that on, got to work on a lot of incredible aircraft. And then where film's always kind of just been on the picture. It's always been something I wanted to do, be a part of. Just never really had like an idea of how to go about it, right? Like it's always kind of like guessing and checking, not really sure of a direction or what to do or where to go. So I got out of the military in April of 2016. I got into a bad car accident and kind of had no direction, wasn't really sure about what I was going to do or what I wanted to do. But I always knew film, something film related. At that time, I broke up with my girlfriend of 5 years. Well, she broke up with me, excuse me. I'll give her that credit. Um, and it was kind of like, well, what am I going to do? Like, what am I going to move back home and just, start from scratch back at home? Or like, am I really going to take a chance and do it? So I ended up flying out. At this time, I was playing poker professionally on the pro circuit a little bit. So I was doing that. And I flew out for the World Series of Poker in Las Vegas and with my buddy Tim. And we ended up driving to LA on a couple of the days where I wasn't really playing cards as much. And went there, visited the Los Angeles Film School, and kind of walked down the campus and was kind of like, you know what, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. And within that time frame, I got a tour of the campus and I put in my application that day to get accepted, and I got in. So I was like, great.
Kind of love at first sight, I guess.
Yeah, it was different, right? If you grow up in the East Coast, it's a vastly different mentality. It's a different type of, it's a different process out here. Right. Out here is very aggressive. If you ever came across anybody from the East Coast, there's this aggression that I think people have here compared to California, where it's vice versa, where it's like people are easygoing, right? They want to get stuff done, but it's very calm, it's cool, collective.
Right.
So it was something that intrigued me, and I was like, you know what, if I'm going to do it now, I'm young enough, I'll do it, I'll make it happen. And that's what ultimately led me to California and the Los Angeles Film School, and what kind of kicked off my filmmaking career.
And so from LAFS, you had described, there's a lot of similarities in the regimented style of, military activity and, the field that we're in. Both are collaborative industries. Both are industries that require a lot of technical knowledge and attention to detail and things like that. Did you, right out of the gate, like right at the beginning of your time at LAFS, did you start to kind of see those parallels and start did you intentionally start working towards, some of these military-esque type projects, or is it something that you just kind of found your way into, or did others around you kind of encourage it? I'm not sure exactly on the timeline here. Help me to understand. You did some projects with SWAT. Was that the earliest thing, or was it the Air Force documentary that you were? Which one of those came first?
SWAT. SWAT was one of the first TV shows that I've had the opportunity to work on. To kind of go back to, in regards to what you were saying, military-esque wise, right? So I think the idea of like just do what you know, right? Be comfortable with what you know. Mm-hmm. I think that kind of held precedence, right? When first starting at Los Angeles Film School, I met Alex, who you work with, Alex Casella, and he also has a military background as well. So it's actually a fun story. If him and I kind of hated each other at first because it was always, I don't know if it was a mutual competition. We never really came to like the decision of what it actually was, but it turns out that we both just had the same type of mindset. And I don't know if it was bestowed through the military, right? There's a military core values that kind of get trained and like embedded into you, and it's integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all that we do.
Right.
And that's kind of something that I subconsciously, I guess, implemented into my life, right? Doing the right thing when nobody's watching, doing a job and getting the job done, no matter what it takes. And then ultimately doing it like at a performance that's beyond excellent, right? There's no room for failure. So that type of style and interaction and just that way of life has always intrigued me, right? Just doing things until it's done. That kind of, it carries over into my film, The Mat, that we're going to get to in a little bit later. But that idea of just, you don't stop when the job's finished, you stop when it's done. So it's a never ending cycle of, you're constantly pursuing and moving forward. So that kind of translated over to getting onto SWAT and the process I had to do to get onto there, because it wasn't really necessarily an easy process. And anybody that's attempted to get onto a film set while you're in film school knows how difficult the process can actually be.
Yes.
They don't really teach you that stuff in film school, right? So that's like the caveat behind it. Like, you learn how to make a movie, you learn how to, everything from start to finish, what makes a good story, you learn all that, but what they don't really teach you is how important the relationships are, and the connections that you build from the beginning to actually get you through, onto a set of a caliber like SWAT or 911 or things of that nature. So, I know I'm babbling on a little bit here, but,
that's what
that
we're
mentality
here
of absolutely. So, like, and that's kind of like, it plays into that, where, you don't stop when you're finished, you stop when you're done. And the story I always relate to is, right, so just to get on a film set, like, the goal is, what are you going to do to get on a film set, right? Like, I'm not going to walk into Warner Brothers and kick down the gate and say, "What's up, guys? Just graduated film school, and give me $200 million, and I'm going to go ahead and make your movie." Like, clearly, that's just not the process.
Right.
You find out that people believe that that's the process, but it really isn't the process. But the first things first is, all right, well, what do I have to do to at least showcase that, my name's Ralph, I'm here to stay. I want to do this. This is a passion, and this is something that I'm going to turn into, a long time career of mine. So what do I got to do? So it's kind of go with the basics. It's kind of relates back to the military. At the beginning, you come in as an E1, then you go to an E2, E3, so on and so forth, all the way up to E9. I chose to take it that way, where it was like, okay, well, what's the bottom? Like, what's the first rank to get on a film set?
Mm-hmm.
And it was a production assistant.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, well, what entails, what's the job description of a production assistant? And for those that don't know or that are familiar with it, you don't really need to have an incredible resume to be a production assistant.
Right.
You really don't. You got to know how to, get coffee and help people out on set, and just kind of be like a kind person around. You got to be tolerable to, just be reliable, be accountable. You got to be, but you got to be sharp. You got to be focused. So that was like phase one. Like, all right, what do I got to do to be a PA? And then the second step was, all right, well, what do I got to do to, who are the ones that hires PAs, right? Because it's all well and good. Like, anybody could pour a cup of coffee, anybody can get breakfast, lunch, or dinner for the cast. Anybody can take people from point A to point B or lock up a corner, things like that. But who are the people that are hiring these people? So you start doing research, and you find out, okay, well, it's a second, additional second, things like that. So I was like, okay, well, there's got to be a way to find this. There's got to be a way to make it happen. How do I do it? To make a very long and gruesome story short, I came across amassed a list of every single person that has ever registered with the DGA, the Directors Guild of America, and was like, all right, well, what am I going to do here? And so I developed a system, and which entailed of every 3 days waking up and sending emails all through the A's and then all through the B's and all through the C's, so on and so forth, of just like, hi, I'm Ralph. I want to do this. What can I do to earn a position on your team? Something like that, right?
Right.
So the story goes, 7,300 emails, got 4 no responses, right? And I got 1 yes. And the 1 yes was the reason why I was able to then network my way not only through SWAT, but then through 911, and then Star Trek Picard, and just navigate my way around and to fully encompass what a set was, and to really like learn the ins and outs of like what it goes into actually filming a movie outside of the film school aspect.
Amazing. Yeah, no matter what role you want to take in this industry, writer, actor, director, grip, anything, you have to get used to the idea of putting yourself out there a lot and getting rejected a lot at every level. I don't care if you're Tom Hanks. I'm sure he gets turned down for stuff from time to time, and developing a thick skin and understanding that is part of the process to build out a network is definitely very critical. And I like what you say about hearkening back to that military philosophy of, working until the job is done, not just until you're off the clock, because as we all know, anybody can call themselves a DP and point a camera somewhere, but and realistically, in a lot of cases, if you're on the set there, maybe nobody is going to make those attention to detail suggestions to you that day, and you can maybe get through the day doing a, pardon the language, a half-assed attempt, or a subpar execution, but the results are gonna eventually reveal themselves, and it's going to have an effect on your ability in the future. But if you go in on the day with that philosophy of, I'm going to execute this to the best possible form that it can be, rather than just, I'm going to complete the job, that really is the difference between one time on set and being at the top of somebody's Rolodex. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And like you made a great point that, the industry does a very good job of weeding out the people that don't really give a shit. And excuse my direct and like aggressive approach, but
right,
like there's people that want to work, and there's people that are willing to do what they have to advance their careers, right? So, and it's kind of like this like unwritten, it's like a feeling. I don't even know how to really describe it, but like you could just tell when you're on a set, like, all right, well, this person's in it to win it, and this person's clearly just here to collect a paycheck, which is perfectly fine, right? Like, absolutely, like do your work, get paid. It is what it is. But there's a certain drive that that you just see on a set of like, okay, well, clearly this person's here for a purpose. It's not just here for that paycheck. So
for a paycheck, or because they want to be starstruck for a little while. I've seen that a few times. But yeah, you have to maintain a focus.
Yeah, exactly. Maintain the focus, right? And then like for those listening to this, right, you think the starstruck aspect is there. Come to find out, they're just regular old people that get paid a lot of money to be on screen, right? Like not to doubt their skill. That there's a lot of incredible people had the opportunity to work with, but like at the end of the day, they're normal people. They, it's sometimes some consider it a job. Other people are like, they treat it as a privilege. It just goes to show that like we realistically are all kind of equals, but the titles that you get on set is where that military aspect comes back into play, which is why I feel the similarities there are so there, right? Like if we were going to build out a ranking structure, which I'm pretty sure some crazy person has done in the past, of like what rank a producer would be, what rank a director would be,
right,
what rank the camera crews would be, so on and so forth. You see where I'm going with it. But that idea and the similarities of that kind of lead into how business in general is ran. So there's just a lot to learn when you start kind of breaking down the process of a film and what actually goes into it and the people involved, so on and so forth.
Absolutely. And the more scaled out a production gets, those things can actually become pretty critical. If you're a PA or a grip or somebody, that needs to report, you need to know who to report to. You need to know who's responsible for what, because we're always under a time limit. It's not, we don't always get the luxury of staying until we've done the absolute best job we can possibly do. Sometimes the sun goes down and we're paying it's $10,000 a day to have everybody out there. It's not always an option to do an extra day, right?
Absolutely.
Now, so SWAT, 911, Picard, obviously you developed a little bit of this trajectory into military-esque or types of productions, or, uniforms and badges, I guess, to a degree. But there's one thing that you have worked on that is just really, really interesting to me, and I definitely want to do a deep dive into this: the Air Force Pararescue Men. It's a 3-day long course to replicate pararescue training with enlisted men that are looking towards 2-year excursions into some pretty serious conditioning and environmental situations. So yeah, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into this project in the first place, what your experiences with it were like? And we'll talk about Sergeant Thomas in a second here, because he's a great character. But how did you get involved in this in the first place?
Perfect. So during our conversation, I know we spoke in the past, but you're going to hear me bring up Alex a lot, Alex Casella. So, I mean,
who is listening in right now, by the way, just so you know.
Yeah. So, and the reason why I say that, like the kid, like he's my partner in crime, right? And I call him the kid. Like I'm not meaning that in a derogatory.
Oh, so sorry, we are just getting a little technical difficulty, Ralph. Give me just a second here.
In our apartment, like, dude, like, what the hell are we gonna do, man? Like, we're bored. Like, you can only play so many video games. You can only do, you can only eat so much food until you're like, what are we really gonna do? And he was like, dude, like, remember that old TV show about pararescuemen and like combat rescue where they followed like all these, hardcore series around and they did. And I was like, yeah, I totally get it. He was like, what if we did that? I was like, well, that sounds like a lot of fun, but what would it entail, right? So he started doing his own due diligence, started researching. I didn't think he was being serious about it at first, if I'm being quite frank. And I was like, all right, well, whatever. It'll happen if it happens. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. I'm focusing on, at the time I was planning my own feature documentary and things like that. So out of nowhere, he hits me up and he's like, hey, so there's this guy, Brian Silva, who does this program down in Texas. And it's a pararescueman program. And I was like, what are you talking about? Right. So, and we kind of broke it down, and it turns out that during the time, Brian takes civilians that are looking to join pararescuemen and go through the training. He takes them through a 3-day course of like what it's going to look like, of like, hey, if you could survive 3 days, and I say that with a grain of salt, like if you can survive the 3 days, this is what 2 years of your life is essentially going to be looking like. So let's give you a taste. And if you think that you have what it takes to do it, then by all means do it. But if not, back out, because this shit's no joke. And that's how it came about. Like Alex kicked it off and was like, dude, I need somebody there to help me with this. We got to find a way to raise money. We have to find a way to film this thing. Like, what camera do we want to shoot on? Like, so we built it from scratch and built this incredible relationship with Brian. And it didn't really hit me until we were actually waiting at the airport. And I was like, yo, like, we just did this. Like, and it was only like a 6-week, 7-week turnaround, give or take. Like, it wasn't like we had like 4, 5, 6 months to plan for it. It was kind of like the inception was there. What are we going to do this? And we met with Brian, we met with his team, and was like, hey, like, we're going to come out and we're going to film this. And he was like, cool. And he almost had that mentality of like, I'll believe it when I see it. Right.
Right.
And then that's what happened. We kind of showed up and it was like, yo, like, you guys are here, like the real deal. Like, you guys are actually here to do this. And we're like, absolutely, we're here to do this. Like, this is our goal. Like, we're filmmakers. We're going to make this shit happen, and we want to make it happen. So we followed these people around for 3 days, and it was definitely one of the most extensive film shoots I was a part of, right? Because even like when you work on SWAT, like, it's a set schedule. Like, you just know, like, if you get your call sheet, I'm showing up at 4:30, probably going to run till 6 in the afternoon, whatever, and then we'll go home. Because of the nature of this training course, it was like we had a quote unquote set schedule, but as a guerrilla documentary style filmmaker, the schedule is there just to kind of be on paper. Things change, you need to adapt. So we were up at 2 a.m. We were filming, following these guys go through crazy, whether it be 10-mile ruck runs at 3 a.m. to then going into the pool at 5 a.m. It was just this long, where like we were going through our own training experience going through this. It was that intense.
Wow.
And it's always cool seeing people of another industry, for like the military, like peek in, right? Because at one point I was that from the military. I was looking in from a film side, like, I wonder what actually gets involved in film. Like, what is the purpose of it? Like, is it really as simple as picking up a camera and, pointing it at somebody and shooting it? Like, what really goes in there? And I bring up the Sergeant Thomas incident because, so he was one of those people, right? Guys, tough as nails. Like, pretty sure he ate nails for breakfast. And he's one of those guys that, like, he did not tolerate bullshit. He just doesn't. Like,
yeah.
His career and his job as a pararescueman, if you fuck around, you die. Like, there's no,
right.
Like, it's that extreme, right? So I would guess that he just lives in this fight or flight mentality constantly. So, when you see people running around with the camera and like me running around the pool, like, oh, Alex, run over here. Like, we have to get this, like, jump in the pool, get this shot.
Right.
It could come off cumbersome. It's kind of like, oh, like, what the hell are these kids doing? So at the beginning of the film shoot, it's interesting seeing all the cadres and the trainers like, yeah, I don't want to be on camera, right? Besides Brian, everybody's like, yeah, I don't want to be on camera. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be on camera.
Mm-hmm.
So you're like, okay, fine. Like, we'll respect your decision. Like, it is what it is. We don't have to be on camera. But as like the hours go on and they start seeing how involved the crew is, right? Like they start seeing like, damn, like Alex is in the pool swimming with these people that are drowning to get a shot. Like they're mentally like, what the hell is film, right? Like, and they had that realization. And so I caught on to that very early on. Like I noticed that with Sergeant Thomas. Alex and I would sit down like at night and be like, all right, like, what do we got to do? And I was like, dude, we're going to get this guy on camera. Like we are, there's no doubt about it. And the second day we're going through filming, I see him, he's looking at us. And every time like we would get a shot, I just noticed he would peek over and look at the monitor. He was always looking at the monitor to see what we were filming. But then like when you would look at him, he would kind of like turn away and not pay attention. So like finally there was like a very intense scene, right? So the guys are laying on the pool. I think there's 50 or 60 of them. They're laying on the pool. They're doing that butterfly kicks. They can't even breathe. They're soaking wet. They have a hose being sprayed in their face. And there's this awesome shot in the documentary where Sergeant Thomas is just walking on there and like looking at them like a hawk, like eyes, like he's just grilling these people down. And it's a great transition because Brian is the main focus at the beginning. And then out of nowhere, it's almost like Sergeant Thomas takes the reins and just starts fucking these people up. Excuse my language. And that happens. And at the end of that, I went to Sergeant Thomas and was like, you want to see something cool? And he was like, sure. And we showed him. And because we made him look like an absolute badass,
now he's
the rest of the whole time, he's like, dude, get me doing this and come over here and catch me doing that. Like it was that sort of like camaraderie that builds, right? Like everybody wants it's. And I do think it's a military thing. Like, hey, man, like at first I'm going to come extremely standoffish because I don't know you, you don't know me, but we're kind of thrown in this weird situation that we're forced to enjoy together.
Right.
But then there's a moment where that breaks, where you realize that you both have everybody's intentions, like the right intentions in mind. And that's when the fun truly begins. So that kind of kicks off the connection of military SWAT all the way up to the pararescueman story and how we went on to win a couple of film awards in that category. So
now one thing that I had this conversation just recently with Lindsay Taylor Jackson. She was working in and around the Denali National Park area, which is, you know, a national park, and you're obviously doing this project at a very serious training facility that has a lot of classification associated with it. So you had to, you know, you can't have cameras inside that training facility, I assume. So there's probably a lot of focus on exterior shots. How much of a challenge was that for you to still build out a great narrative, but having that restriction? And how do you navigate a lot of those other types of, you know, situations when you're doing something that involves engagement with a government operation?
Yeah, great question. So they're right. And like, not to kind of like put this on the spectrum of like, yo, like we were this badass team. Like it is what it is, right? There's a lot of things that the U.S. government doesn't want you to be a part of. And a lot of the training that these people go through, some of the stuff is secret, or quite frankly, they just don't want you in their house, right? Like that's just it. Like it's their place of business. It's their place. It's their zen. They don't want anybody that's not supposed to be there. So there's this, again, it's a mutual understanding of like, listen, I'm not going to make you guys look bad. Here's the parameters of what we're trying to do and what we're going to accomplish. If we can do it within the realm that you have, great. But if not, let us know, and we'll find a way to navigate around it. So it was good. Like when we went to the house, we went to the clubhouse. Right? Like clubhouse, and we're on Clubhouse. And I'm probably even using the wrong terminology in this case, but when we were actually on the base, it was actually nostalgic because San Antonio is where you go to basic training, right? So pretty cool to kind of drive around San Antonio again and like see where you were getting screwed up and like spit on and things like that going through basic training.
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, I'm here to actually film a different aspect of this. And I'm going to like one of the most badass training facilities across the board, right? Like Navy SEALs get this huge title of like, yeah, you know, like the frogmen, and they have this, and again, like what they do is incredible. No one's taking that away from them, but pararescuemen in their own aspects are like, who do you call when Navy SEALs need to be safe? Like you call them pararescuemen. So like, it's kind of that regard. Like, yo, you're like, we're meeting a different specimen of people. So, and it's like this weary nervousness that you get over. So when you get to the facility and you're walking around, they're very respectful. There's a mentality that they have from the beginning. The second you walk in to the second you leave, like, loyalty and their mission statement, like they live to that till they die. Like it's that intense. So that's why at the beginning of the documentary, we have Brian kind of, he walks through what it means to be a pararescueman and that statement of how intense it is, because that's how intense it was from the beginning. I do wish we could have got footage inside the facility, because it's so cool, man. Like it's just right. Like it looks like it looks like a UFC gym. Again, if I'm being honest, just without like the octagon, just how it's set up, the workout facilities, the classroom that's there for them to go in and learn certain things. But you just navigate and you roll with the punches. So Brian, because he has this system and schooling in place, he kind of had the connections already with, I believe it was a local college. Alex can correct me if I'm wrong. But one of the local colleges or schools that were in the area that let us use their pool, and they didn't really care about filming anything there. We just didn't really get any logos, like just things like that, trying to stay out of it from like a marketing and advertising perspective. Mm-hmm. But you kind of just roll with the punches, man. Like you just got to be ready. You got to be on point. So if something was to change, like you have to have a team willing to make that change and adapt. A lot of times when people get confronted with things that need to change on the spot, they freeze up and they're not really sure what to do. So it's cool to have the crew that you can rely on, so that if something needs to change, we need to instantly do it. Or if we wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning because Brian decides to shoot Alex and us a text saying, hey, we're about to scare the shit out of these guys and put them on a 10-mile ruck, get your cameras. like you got to be ready to go. So right. It's that intense, right? So it's good to just the navigation, understanding how certain systems work, and understand how not only their systems, but your team and your processes. Once you have that narrowed down to a T, it's almost like you're invincible and unstoppable.
That's awesome. Now, there was a little situation that you told me about where, due to your Pelican cases and all the gear you were carrying around, you had a little case of mistaken identity. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's actually I have an email I'm banned by Airbnb, and it's primarily because and like it's obviously an understanding, and if I really wanted to fight for my ability to rent out another Airbnb, I'm pretty sure I can. But so we stayed at like an apartment condo complex, like I think it was 10 to 15 minutes right off the base, and it's a military town, right? Like it's a military town, so like people kind of already have this understanding of like, yeah, like everybody around us, you're more than likely going to be surrounded by military. What we didn't really understand was that the place that we were going to, that we rented, was like a gigantic, somewhat like Airbnb complex before they were actually known as like Airbnb complexes. So we were there, and because of the nature of the work we were doing, right? Like, I mean, I'll try to paint a picture of it, right? 4 pretty muscular dudes with like, I have a full beard, wearing military hats, like wearing full military garments, like in regards to just, the types of jackets you're wearing. Like there's a certain military look, whatever you're picturing in your head of what you would think like somebody that's not in a uniform,
it's
but
literally
like
the Expendables.
Like exactly, like that's like what it was. And like it wasn't like we planned on it. It was just kind of just like, yeah, like when in Rome, right? Like do what the Romans do. So, but because we were waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning to grab the cameras and move around, like we're not setting up our cameras in house and carrying it. Like we're doing it on location. So we had a butt ton of Pelican cases and like all of our equipment. So the neighbor across the hall, they had a Ring camera. I think it was a Ring, or like one of the, like whatever those cameras are outside. And like at 2 o'clock in the morning, they would keep getting these notifications, and they freaking reported it to Airbnb saying that our next door neighbor's there. And then there was like some weird, like there was gunshots heard, right? Like around the time that we were leaving. There was just like this weird misunderstanding that somehow I got caught up in, where they were like, hey, so like you have to pay this fee and then you need to have this fee. And I was like, guys, like this is the nature of our like this is why we were walking around at 2 o'clock in the morning and, coming back at 11 p.m. But like, it was just such a it was a shit show, for lack of a better term. Like, that's how insane it got. And we were like, well, what are we going to do? I'm like, well, clearly we have nothing to do with this, but it's, people complained, and that's the reason why I kind of got banned from Airbnb for the time being, I guess.
Yeah. Well, if you were mercenaries, you were the least discreet mercenaries of all time, it sounds like.
Oh, absolutely. There was nothing discreet about it in the slightest bit, which is why it was comical.
So now those are some great experiences, and you've parlayed into a pretty a more eclectic career as of late. You've been doing some behind the scenes short documentary style work with comedian Eric D'Alessandro. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, so it's actually funny how I got involved with that, right? And it's something that's so simple as like, hey, you just keep reaching out to somebody until you get a no.
Right.
So it was almost almost 2 years ago, and my fiance sent me an Instagram DM and was like, hey, like, because she likes Eric D'Alessandro, thinks his comedy is fun. She was like, hey, you should reach out. They're looking for somebody. And I was like, cool, I'm going to do it. And I reached out, no response. And I was like, well, now I'm kind of annoyed, right? Like, at least tell me to F off. So I was like, hey, just following up, so on and so forth, no response. Until I was like, dude, like, what is going on here? So I researched who his agent was, and I was like, all right, like, if I'm really going to do this, I'm going to fully commit to it. But I was like, all right, let me get one last chance. And I reached out, and he was like, hey, Ralph, like, totally going to do it. Didn't know I was speaking to his manager, Matt, at the time. But I was like, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. Like, I saw you were looking for this. Give me an opportunity. I promise you I'll crush it for you. And he was like, cool, sounds good. Here's a place. Here's a location. Here's a time. Let's do it. And I didn't realize that the location was, 4.5 hours from where I was. And it was like 9 hours until I had to be there. So I was like, well, son of a gun, right? Like, that's where it was like, well, you got to do what you got to do. And that relationship kind of built, same idea, like, he doesn't know me from a hole in a wall. And it kind of kicked off where it was like, hey, like, you only need me for this job. I'm going to make sure I do the job for you. And it's the product of do what's expected of you when you're there, and then do a little more so they can see that you're here for a long time. Mm-hmm. And because of that, and what I did with him turned into like, hey, like, we're performing at Live Casino in Philadelphia. Are you available? And that was yes. And then it got into like, hey, Ralph, like, considering filming Eric's comedy special, would this be something you'd want to be involved in? And then I actually reached out to Alex to see what we could do from there. But and it was the relationship kind of grew up until his recent performance, or his recent show at the St. George Theater in Staten Island that he sold out for 1,800 people both nights. So it's cool being a part of it, where you get to kind of see it from this weird perspective of an outsider. They take a chance on you, and because they took a chance on you, you have this like relationship there where it's like they can rely on you. That sense of reliability feels great, because then it's like, yeah, you're dependable. You can be relied on. If someone calls you up in the dead of night and goes, hey, I need this done, can you do it? They know that your yes means yes, and they know that you're going to get the job done. So that's a certain, the ability to do that. And that opens the doors for so many things now. Meeting with him and his network of people, if they were ever looking for it, right? Like, it just opens the doors because of the job that you do.
Right. So how would you describe the stand-up community? Would you say, is it a competitive type of atmosphere? Is it a little, do they work together? Is Eric very like protective of you as his camera guy, or does he prefer to, tell, exclaim your accomplishments and send other comedians
absolutely.
your way? Is it, yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So obviously I'd hope that would be the goal. I think in regards to who goes about doing that is kind of out of his jurisdiction, only because like he's represented, he has an agent and a manager, right? So right. As long as you're doing a good job for him, that's great. But you really want to, and I hate to say it like this, and Eric, if you're listening, just know that I crushed it every single time. But it's the idea of, you want to impress the agent, you want to impress the manager, because they're the one at the end of the day that's sending you, they're sending you the money. They're the ones that are like, hey, I represent Eric, but I also represent, this guy and that guy, or this band and that band. So Ralph did a good job here. I wonder if he could do a good job here, right? So you're kind of juggling this strange I don't really know how to word it without it sounding pretentious, and I'm really not meaning to come off pretentious, but there's a fine line that you have to like follow, because you never want to do too much to where you're overbearing, but then again, if you do too little, then you seem like you're not doing your job. So it's, you got to know, you kind of read the room, know the crowd, you kind of get this feeling. The world of comedy is really cool though, because like from a comedian standpoint, for what I'm seeing, like everybody just freaking likes each other and they're just trying to be funny, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like I've heard like the conversations in the background, like there's no like shit talking. Like it's always like, did you hear that joke? Did you hear that skit? Like, man, like the crowd was going crazy when he said that. Like, did you hear how they respond? Like, that's what's cool about that craft, hearing how comedians that may or may not have ever worked together in the past, but you put them in a green room and like they're talking about the dynamics of a joke and what makes a joke really funny and why it's funny. Like that's a cool dynamic, and having the opportunity to kind of sit in the background like a fly on the wall and just hear how those conversations go.
Right.
It's like I'm learning a whole new industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I don't want to say free education, but you're just learning what truly goes into another person's craft. And I think in this industry across the board, whether it's film, television, Broadway, music, across the board, at least having a decent understanding of how the person or the people that you're working with and what their process and what it actually takes to go into their craft. Once you have an understanding of how that goes, your job makes more sense, because then you're able to help them get to what they want to accomplish. And in the meantime, you're also helping yourself get to that next step in your career.
Right, right. And this engagement with, the comic world is a pretty natural segue towards your podcasting production company. Can you tell us a little bit more about this? This is a fairly recent development for you, correct?
Yeah, that's kind of the new endeavor, right? So once COVID kind of sent me back to the East Coast, filming is here and this is an option, but you kind of go to where the market is. So while I'm filming, I'm doing a lot of stuff for clients that it kind of stinks that, from a showcase level, like if I'm ever bidding on a job or an opportunity like that presents itself, that's where I get to kind of showcase the portfolio. It just stinks that the public portfolio isn't really out there because it's not made for the public. That's one thing you find out too as you start going through things, that, yeah, like you're doing work, but if you're being commissioned and your work for hire, thank you for filming it, but that work actually isn't really yours. And unless I give you the rights to show it,
right,
I don't want it on your site, right? Granted, that's not the case all the time, but that is kind of like just it's like that mutual understanding. So, but podcasting kind of came about. I always wanted to do podcasting. Even when I lived in California, that was always an option. And it was always just like, well, I truly don't think podcasting is as intricate as people want to make it out to be. And I kept fighting with myself for a very long time about that. Because the production of podcasting, if I could film a friggin' movie, how hard is it to produce a podcast? Like that was my mentality about the whole creation of it. Like I did this for this, and there's much more involved in this. Is it truly that difficult? And then you come to find out that it's the same thing across the board. It's not the process that's difficult. It's the story. It's the purpose of a podcast. Once you have a purpose of a podcast, the rest is history, because anything can come from it. So I turned that and I was like, well, what's the next option here, right? Because no one has $300 to $400 a podcast session. Maybe they do, right? But like the people where I'm at, they don't have the access to that sort of capital to do it, let alone like, hey, I'm going to produce a podcast. Like, what's my budget? And I tell you, yeah, like a fully intricate podcast video production, start to finish. Like this is the range of it. Sometimes the door gets slammed in your face. So my thing is, I wanted the opportunity for people to have the experience that I had in regards to production, where I was given a chance and an opportunity to do it. Like, who am I to say no to somebody else that wants the opportunity and chance to do it? So I'm in the process. I wish I could send you the website, because like literally today I signed paperwork to have it redone and revamped. You could check it out if you want to, but it's like a throwaway website, which is unfortunate. But the purpose of the podcast room is to give ambitious creators the opportunity to experience what a podcast is from start to finish without it destroying their bank account, right? The idea is like, it's a gym membership, but for podcast production, where you pay a subscription fee for the month, and you have access to the studio, you have access to the recording devices, you have access to this, you have access to that, so that you would come in and truly do a podcast without the the worry of, well, can I afford $1,700-$1,800 a month to do 4 episodes of a podcast? Because the answer is no, not the average consumer can't do that,
Right.
unfortunately. So the goal is to kind of shift it and go, well, when I was in California and I wanted to do a podcast, I wish this was an opportunity for me while I was out there, and it wasn't. So I said, well, let me at least do it here and see the process that I can do to bring that here. And that's currently where it's at. So the podcast room, I currently produce 2 podcasts, one called Lunch Beers, which is an awesome podcast. This is going to be a little shameless plug. So if you're going to give it a listen, it's a great show, guys. So anybody that lives and works in corporate America, it's 4 guys that clock out on their lunch break for an hour, get absolutely hammered, talk about shitty business deals and sports degeneracy before clocking back into work. And the goal is like, hey, don't worry, there's no HR here. So that's like a fun podcast in that regard. If you like the debauchery of corporate America and like hearing the struggles of what it actually is to get a business deal signed. And the alternative is I work with Randy Dietrich, who we did a documentary, Blue Ridge, the Randy Dietrich story on. And his next passion in life is to motivate people. He wants to be a public speaker. Picture like Gary Vee, but like not as to the extent of Gary Vee.
Okay.
And that's his goal, right? So his goal is to do so. So what we did from a podcasting perspective was kind of formulate this idea. He has talks that he's building and developing from scratch, and we put them on a podcast. And we started from the beginning. Some are 2 minutes, some are 15, some are 30. And we talk about the podcast, like what it is. He goes through the whole quote unquote talk as if he was presenting it to a group of people. And then him and I, at the end of it, from an outsider's perspective, as a new entrepreneur compared to a seasoned entrepreneur, kind of break down like why it's crucial, like for certain aspects, like the importance of asking for opportunity, the importance of, doing the right thing, like how does that translate to business? So those are the 2 podcasts that I currently produce out of the podcast room. But we're looking to get more through there, but ultimately provide it as like a generalized public service so that anybody could come in and pay a monthly fee to just come in and record and essentially leave and have a full edited podcast at their disposal, and they can begin their podcasting journey that way.
That's fantastic. It's a fantastic resource that you're providing to people that probably otherwise wouldn't have access to these tools. I haven't heard of anybody replicating this model, so kudos to you for having the ingenuity. Tell us again the name of those 2 shows and where we can find them.
Absolutely. So Lunch Beers, and that could be found on Apple and Spotify, and Podbean, Google Podcasts. It's all over all the directories. And the second is the Randy Dietrich Living on Purpose podcast, same as before. Apple, Spotify, Podbean, they're all over the place. Randy and I recently started doing the video podcasting aspect because over the tax write-off season came in the end of 2022. So purchased all new camera equipment, brand new microphones for the studio. And now we have the video element added in there as well. So the last 2 episodes that are currently up, I believe it's 86 and 87. They now have the video element on it, which can be found on the Podcast Room YouTube page as well.
That's awesome. Be sure to check that out, listeners. And you have another project that you're working on right now that I definitely want to make sure we get to now, as we've been going for about 45 minutes here because you are a great conversationalist, Ralph. We're so pleased to have you as part of the Cinevo
I appreciate
community. And we're so pleased to have you here as a guest today. Definitely tell us about the Mat. You've got a short film proof of concept completed. We're looking for funding and sponsorship opportunities here. Tell us about this story. Tell us about what inspired you into it, and tell us where you are now and what the next steps are.
Absolutely. So the Mat came to fruition. God, it had to have been. So my buddy Mikey Dahlstrom, he was a collegiate wrestler, and he came out on a business trip when I was out in Cali. I believe it was 2018, maybe early 2019. And he came out there, and I wrestled for a year when I was in high school, but he performed at the highest stages that's outside of the Olympics. And I was like, all right, well, this is something that I'm truly involved in, right? Like, I love this. I think this is great. Like, what does it really entail? And then you start really breaking it down and come to the realization that, dude, like, it's that same idea. Same thing with wrestling. Same thing with the pararescue in the military. where it's that involved. Like it's fight or flight. Like it's me against the world. I'm taking this on. I truly think that wrestling is that sport where there is an I in team because you only perform as well as you are, right? Whereas other sports, there's no I in team, but there's a me in team, whatever it is. But the idea of like, no, like it truly is um like a me sport where if you don't perform, you're not good. And there's just something about that that I really that I like. There's a quality about it that I truly enjoy. So him and I, we got hammered one night, and he started talking to me about this one guy. His name was Kerry Colon, and how like intricate his wrestling was, and how he's known for this backflip called the Colot flip and he used that to pin somebody. And I was like truly invested, and I was like, yo, like this is cool. This is the process. And then the creative juices start flowing, and you start going, well, what can really happen here? Like, I wonder what it's like to live as right. Like, I don't know Kerry. I've never met Kerry. But I'm curious to know what that experience would be like to actually live like with him and just experience that. And that's kind of where it started. So then that's a story about a young kid. And there's a lot of personal anecdotes in there that I add in there from a storytelling perspective and the idea of like a father-son relationship and how crucial it is, right? So I grew up, I'm Sicilian. And those of you that don't know Italian culture, things like that, it's just very stringent, right? Very Roman Catholic, very on the point. But my dad was that same way of like, hey, if you're going to do something, then do it. Like you don't quit. Like if you say you're going to do it and you truly want to do it, you can't quit at it because if you do that, then what the hell is the point of doing it? So that was like my relationship growing up. So that translates into there because sometimes when you go through this process, all you want from somebody, whether it be a father figure, whether it be a dad, all you want is for somebody to say, good job. Sometimes it's all you want. That's not going to be the reason you stop, right? But if you really think about it, when was the last time someone told you good job? Like, I could probably count on one hand how many times in my 30 years someone actually said that, right?
Yeah.
So there was this idea and dynamic that I really wanted to mess around with of like, what would it be to be the son of an ex-Olympic gold medalist who just so happened to be a wrestler, and he is now my high school wrestling coach who only understands perfection. Like, what would that concept look like?
Yeah.
And really just kind of diving into it, like, man, like throughout this whole process, how bad it would be for someone to say good job, because once that happens, you've arrived and the job's essentially completed because it's completed, and that's the thing. And I think in life that you're never truly done because once you arrive, you automatically start failing. So
yes.
There's a lot of concepts in there. And again, like I don't want to banter too much about it, but we're really involved intricately about getting the film done. So my recent endeavor, I work with this, I got introduced to a man, his name John Oakes, who owns the Poconos Park Amphitheater up by me. And he comes from the music industry, heavily involved. And he's helped produce films in the past. He's done a lot of stuff from the music side as well, music videos. His involvement in the music scene is quite extensive. And recently the idea is like, hey man, like you want to make a movie, we're going to film a movie. And it's that idea of if you say you're going to do it, then let's friggin' do it. Stop talking about it. Let's do it. So that's where we're at. It's done. The feature script's currently on the festival circuit. It's more of like we're getting like an evaluation done to see where it can be on the grading charts out of 10, because some festivals do it out of a 10. Right. It currently sits at a 7.9, so it's not entirely bad, right? Like there's definitely room for improvement. But before I get it up to the level where we're going to start like finding funding and investors and reaching out to studios, I want to get it in the high 8 area, because then the only reason they're going to say no is if they want their team to do it. Right. And not have me do it. So that's like the overall, right? I'm that mentally confident that like, if you're going to tell me no, there better be a good reason no. Right. So that's kind of just where our head is at with it and where it's at now. But yeah, man, it's one hell of a ride trying to get a film done while, doing this and podcasting and selling stuff and trying to get Alex involved on projects. And it's a lot of fun, a lot of intricate stuff happening over here.
I know we have financiers and producers in our listening audience, both on our YouTube and in our Discord channel. So I can't endorse this one enough. I've seen the pitch deck. I have a pretty good idea of the story. The Matt, I mean, it's a timeless story about, male relationships. You have a really nice attention to detail, articulating what an East Coast winter really feels like, and I think that comes across in the story. So yeah, we absolutely wish you the best of luck, and we're going to do everything that we can to help get this thing over the line, along with you. It's a great story, and it comes from a personal place, which I think is a big factor to authentic storytelling, is that ultimately you should be telling something from your perspective, from your experience, from your heart. And I think the Matt does that
Absolutely.
really well. Well, we've been going for a good while here. I won't take up any more of your day, Ralph, but thank you so much for joining us. This has been a great conversation. We're so glad to have you as part of the Cinevo community. And we really, really look forward to seeing the next step in your career, sir.
Hey, man, I appreciate you having me on. If there's ever anything I could do for you guys or Cinevo, don't ever hesitate to reach out. I appreciate the opportunity to work with you guys.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ralph. Thank you to all of our listening audience. And again, be sure to check out our website, Cinevo.com. If you are a filmmaker yourself, be sure to submit to our grant contest. Although if you're submitting in professional fiction category, you are going to be going up against the Matt and Ralph Lucchese. So good luck.
Thank you guys so much.
Have a great one.